not a joke. This has become a very serious matter. I was denied permanent residence in the United States for 9 years. People just walk in like that and get permanent residence for 4 years, 3 or 4 years. I could not travel outside of America without being on parole. They had a little thing, my picture. I'm on parole. I had to go to Trinidad on parole, on the country arrest. Why do these things happen? Surely knowledge of this nature is recognized as being very revolutionary, very serious. But let me come back to my subject. The discovery just a few months after the steel-making machine by Lynch and Robbins, they discovered an astronomical observatory, a kind of African Stonehenge, at Namoratunga, northwest Kenya. Namoratunga, the place of stones. They discovered that the Africans there in Kenya had developed an astronomical observatory. It looked at first like just a scrabble of stones, but when the stones were properly studied, they were in precise alignment, the constellation of stars, and they were able to show that these Africans had built an accurate prehistoric calendar 300 years before Christ in Kenya, which is at least 100 years before the father, so-called father of modern astronomy. And this was not their first calendar. I don't want to touch on Egypt now because Sheikh Anta Diop has said enough about that. But let me point to the fact that the calendar we use today is derived from the Egyptian. They were the first people to invent the second of time, the second of art, the hour, the minute. Their astronomical observations over many years produced these ideas, these precise quantities and volumes and times and standards which were later to dominate the world. The Babylonians did not have any proper calendar. The Egyptians had the 365 and a quarter days and the 365. And they took that quarter and they stretched it out over a long period of time. They dealt with that quarter. And they put 5 festival days at the end of the year, festival of the gods, and they split the year equally into 12 months of 30 days each. When the Greeks took it over, then they spread it out. As a result, today we have 28-day months, 29-day months, 30-day months, 31-day months. We need a rhyme in order to remember which is which. That calendar was invented in Ethiopia since 4241 BC. And before I leave Egypt, as I say, I don't want to dwell too much on that, but other parts of Africa. But before I leave that, let me mention the discovery, the significant discovery, which Sheikh Anta Diop pointed to today, of Ta Seti. The discovery of a monarchy in the Nile Valley preceding the Egyptian, at least 2 centuries before the first Egyptian dynasty. And at Ta Seti, they found not only architectural forms to which Dr. Diop pointed to this morning, they found the falcon god Horus. They found the crown, the unmistakable, the uniquely shaped crown of the Egyptians. They found the palace facades that were later used by the Egyptians, and above all, they found the hieroglyphs, so that the world's first major writing system is not even Egyptian, it is Ethiopian, it is Sudanic. There are so many evidences, apart from the question of what the Greeks said, who actually saw these Egyptians, apart from all the evidence that Sheikh Anta Diop has brought forward and others. There is evidence, the migration, the movement of agriculture. Every major plant in Egypt, at least half a dozen are found coming from the south. There's not a single plant that comes down to the south. This nonsense about civilization, that civilization in Egypt was created by Asiatics and Caucasoids, and then they brought the light of civilization down to the benighted black barbarians in the south. Not a single shred of evidence. The script comes up, the agriculture comes up, all the symbols comes up, the conceptions of God, and all the various forms that were to become deities in Egypt. It all comes from the south. The art, everything, you can see its origin in the south, in that Ethiopian and Sudanic world. And Ta Seti is the culmination, it's the capping of the evidence. When we look at astronomy, as I was pointing to the calendars and the thing found at Namaratunga, they found something even more startling among the West Africans. In the 13th century AD, about 7 centuries ago, they found Africans were plotting an invisible star, Sirius B. Sirius A is a bright star we all see in the night sky. Sirius B is impossible to see with the naked eye. It is impossible to see it with the naked eye. It has a magnitude of about 8.5. And the Africans not only saw it, they plotted its orbit and trajectory right up to the end of the 20th century, up to the year 1990. And the diagram produced by our best astronomy today is identical with what they produced centuries ago. We only became aware of that star towards the end of the 19th century. And not only that, they intuited its mass. This is a white dwarf. It is an imploded star. It's not only impossible to see with the naked eye, it is the most sophisticated astronomy that has shown us that a star so imploded is much heavier than stars that appear 6 times brighter and larger. They came to that conclusion. They had plotted the spiral structure of the Milky Way. They had seen the Jupiter and Saturn, the rings and the moons thereof. They had worked all of that out. But particularly Sirius B. It caused such astonishment, such consternation in astronomical circles that Kenneth Brecher of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology in Cambridge, Massachusetts, he said, the Africans have no business knowing any of this. And that is true. The Africans, as we know them, as we have been learned to conceive of them, have no bloody business knowing anything. So that he has to check himself as to who he's talking about, because when we talk about the so-called traditional African, we are not talking about what lay at the core and heart of those shattered civilizations. If you want a modern example of what I mean, why all these discoveries are coming, but let me for a moment dwell on some new discoveries. Do you know that the Africans actually showed something contracting and expanding within the region of Sirius B, a supernova? Do you know only 2 years ago the Einstein orbiting satellite, one of the United States satellites, discovered the supernova? 2 years ago. Space machine. Last year, one of our space machines, American space machines, sent down radar beams into Africa 16 feet below the African Earth and saw traces of ancient rivers running from the Sahara towards the Nile Valley. I said that in my book 7 years ago. I'm not trying to claim anything special about that, because a few anthropologists had said that too on the basis of migration evidence and other kinds of evidence, linguistic networks, etc. But now they can see it from outer space, above the prejudice. They found, for example, mathematical systems in Africa. The first use of numbers, the first scientific evidence of the use of numbers is found in the Congo Zaire. It's known as the Ishango bone. It's 8,000 years old. It's very simple, but it is cited because it's the first evidence we do have. But we have found far more complex mathematical systems, like the Yoruba, for example, are found to be using a complex mathematical system which one of the mathematicians, Conan, calls one of the most abstract and complex mathematical systems. Why didn't we know about this? Because if you go among the Bushmen and the Kalahari, or the Wugabuga and the Lugabuga, you're not going to find mathematics. I mean, you don't go on the edge of the world to search for technologies. I've lived in Europe. I've not only lived in Western Europe. I spent nearly a year in Eastern Europe. I've lived among primitives, both sophisticated Europeans of the cities and semi-primitive Europeans. I've been in parts of Europe, in a village, where as many as 20 people were using one bathroom. This is the 20th century. Nobody writes about those primitives because it's not fair. That's not the European. That is a European. And this is constantly being done to us. This is taken for granted. If you want to deal with the African, you find a savage, that is good enough. And when we can do that in Europe, and when we try to dwell on civilization, because that's what we are largely involved, at least I am, Sheikh Anta Diop, to some extent, Carlos Moore and others are involved in this, the classical civilization, the major classical contributions. When we dwell on this, people say, but you're being romantic. When they're dealing with the primitive, they're not romantic. But when we try to bring it down to the core and center, we're romantic. Look at mathematics in Europe. It was nothing. Do you know that when the number system 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, that's Hindu, the Arabs and Africans invaded Europe as Moors, and the Arabs brought from India the numbers Fibonacci, yes, brought it to Europe first in 1202, but the Europeans didn't accept it because the church said numbers are works of the devil. It's as late as the 17th century. So you have basic arithmetic, that's the most. It became a capital offense during the Inquisition to study advanced mathematics and Arabic documents. Do you know how many documents have been destroyed in the world? The Library of Alexandria, where the Africans had built a library, some people calculated it at 1 million, let me be conservative, 500,000. And these are not the libraries you can duplicate. You could blow up any library here. You could duplicate it somewhere else in the world. There are very few manuscripts that are standing by themselves. This was a time when a manuscript represented centuries of learning, where there were few duplicates or no duplicates at all destroyed. And yet the fragments exist, so significant that we have 10 major medical texts in African languages. The first medical texts in the world are in African language. The first mathematical papyri, which you saw this morning, that's African. Those are the first. Even today, with all the destruction, we could still go back to the African documents and show them on a screen. The Ebers papyrus, the Edwin Smith papyrus, the Smith papyrus, which is 1500 BC. They have chapters on helminthiasis, ophthalmology, gynecology, pregnancy diagnosis, circulation of the blood, the pulse, diagnostic percussion, all that, chapters, intestinal disease and all that 1500 years before Christ. Africans. When we go to look at these things, people say, well, why did it all disappear? How come it all this? But look at the present world today. Suppose there was a third world war, which God forbid, but suppose there was. Most of the technology of the world is concentrated at certain centers within a matter of minutes. And believe me, it is a matter of minutes. It's not no days and weeks. The preliminary battles may take a few days and weeks, movement of armies and a lot of bluffing. But when the bomb strikes, it's just a matter of minutes. And the people who don't see the light when it strikes are the lucky people. Most of the major cities of this civilization will be not even smoky. Will be almost nothing. The bombs dropped at Hiroshima and Nagasaki are baby bombs. They have bombs now 1,000 times more powerful. It does not smash cities, it turns them into vapor. Even the clouds burn. Even the waters of the ocean are thrown up into the sky. You can imagine what the horror. People might survive, but they will survive on the periphery, the edge of the world. That is the people we're going to look to centuries down the road and says, that was their level, that was the level of science in the 20th century. That's what they're doing to Africa. Because what they struck us with was equivalent to 100 hydrogen bombs. Particularly where they struck us most, the consciousness of the African people. I have seen people scraped in such a way that you wonder if there's a brain left at all. Everything is an echo and echo and echo. They haven't even begun to question the basics in this civilization. As Dr. Diop has shown,